people often speak of the right to resist force with force, but he says if you're a Christian, you have an obligation to do that because you owe something to he who originated your liberty.
You are listening to And If Love Remains, a unique show spotlighting people, ideas, science, culture, and art. Your host, Mike Lovett.
Yes, Rachel, this is your podcast in the sky, And If Love Remains. I am your sometimes virtuous, rarely vile, always virile host, Mike Levitt. Welcome to the show, and we have with us the Lion of Liberty, the man, the machine, the legend himself, Joey Wolverton. Welcome.
Thanks, man. That little introduction of yours is worth like 3 points in categories. Plus, it's just I might just have to tax and redistribute that. To be honest, that's a pretty awesome way to describe yourself.
Well, you know, I had a V thing going. You know,
had it and you rolled with it. I was afraid, you might derail, but you just got stronger as you went on. So,
well, it doesn't get much stronger than that. Well, hey, I am super excited. By the way, we are coming not live, but we are coming over video. This is my first video podcast. So I'm very excited to have Joey on for this little, check in the And If Love Remains, checkbook of things to do. So very excited for that. So, but I'm excited to talk about, we're going to continue to talk a little bit about Marcus Aurelius and meditations, some of the philosophies. Professor Wolverton has put together a
Monsignor.
Monsignor. That's right. Has put together a book club that we're going to be reading Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. Get in touch with me or him, and we'll put those contacts in the description if you're interested in joining. It's free. Just the price of the book, man. It's awesome. Yeah, so I'm very excited about that. But how are you doing, man? What's new?
I'm doing well. Just doing the same old, teaching these principles, trying to get people, familiar with the principles that, kept us free. God made us free, but that kept us free for so long, and just trying to do that still every day in one way or the other. I suppose most of my time now, as we speak right now, since it's summertime, is filled with writing for the New American Magazine. I write a few articles for them every day online at thenewamerican.com, and you can read my stuff over there. I try to, it'll be very familiar with the kind of things that I talk about everywhere. It's the same kind of stuff. And I do 3 articles over there a day, Monday through Saturday. And that's where I'm in my time right now. I have several projects. I'm doing second edition of my biography of James Madison, and second edition of the Founder's Recipe book. And trying to take years off my time in hell, brother. That's what I'm trying to do. We're all trying to get out on good behavior.
There you go, man. There you go. One of the things, it's funny when one thinks of the Roman Empire. I don't necessarily immediately think of freedom, although there was a modicum of freedom if you're a Roman citizen, especially. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of the principles that carry through that kind of Western heritage that we've accumulated, comes a lot from the Romans and comes from the Stoics, as we've talked about before, Marcus Aurelius, and part of that is the idea that as a person, you have the right to resist tyranny. That when somebody comes upon you with force, you have the right to resist that, whether that is, a neighbor, a robber, or a political figure. all, I
Mhm.
mean, they're all the same in the mind of if they're attacking you, you have the right to defend and to resist those
Right.
things.
Absolutely, and not only the right, but the obligation to do that. And Algernon Sidney, who wasn't a Stoic per se, but he, in chapter 2 of his book, Discourses Concerning Government, he makes that point. He says people often speak of the right to resist force with force, but he says if you're a Christian, you have an obligation to do that because the source of your liberty, you are not the giver of your liberty. Therefore, you owe something to he who originated your liberty, and that is to say, God. And so you owe it to God to demonstrate to him your appreciation of the liberty that he has given to you and that ultimately vouchsafed to you via the sacrifice of his only begotten son. And so Sidney makes it very clear that it's not just your right to resist force with force when it comes to your life, your liberty, or your property. It is your obligation to do so.
Well, and I think part of that obligation, not just a personal obligation, but also as a um, testimony to others. You know, I think that's an
Yeah.
important thing that the to because if one's going to resist the government, especially a large government, chances of you winning is small, but it can start um, you know, another resistance with maybe a few more people, and you know, it can definitely help um, to as
Well,
they say in the scriptures, have the blood of those to cry up, to God
uh,
to help save those that are in captivity.
well, being from California, that you can have millions of acres of forest that starts because someone lights a cigarette and a spark lands in the wrong place.
Yep.
So don't worry that you feel like your efforts are just a spark. It you can that little spark, if it lands in the right place, can ignite conflagrations that will alter the course of history. And history turns on tiny little fulcrums, my man. And so you got a lot of 14-year-olds who have changed history, and our founding fathers were young men when they did what they did. And it takes people that are educated, people that have been taught from the cradle to appreciate not only the source of your liberty, but the value of your liberty as well. And taught to, as the founders would say, to resist in the first instance. The slightest little disturbance, the slightest little usurpation deserves to be quashed immediately. And not when it's grown too large to control, but in its first appearance, it must be defeated. It must, and so our founding fathers, that was their deal. Is this that big a deal? Maybe not, but it's tyrannical, and thus we will oppose it.
Right. That's the thing. Like a lot of times when we read the Declaration of Independence, for example, when we see the things that um, King George did, some of them are abhorrent and terrible, but others of them seem maybe small and petty. But they're all the same in the sense that what it is signifying is that he is saying he has a right to do to you what no man has the right to do. And things like a tax on tea, things like that it's almost a byword and a hiss now, where it's just like such a joke to talk about that sort of thing. But I think about like in fact, you'll know why. I'm thinking about the Whiskey Rebellion, and um, how that seems like a small thing, but it was not, because they were able to see second and third stages of what was going to happen if they
Mm.
didn't resist.
That's right. Yeah, and all of those things, and that used to be who we were because, and not because we were belligerent, right? Not because we were hotheads, but because that generation was taught by their mothers in the cradle of the true source and value of liberty. And they knew it's something you didn't question. If someone comes and by force is attempting to take your life, your liberty, or your property, then you have an unmitigated and natural right to resist matching force for force. And they didn't question, it wasn't a question. No
Right.
one, even those whom they fought, did not question their right to fight. They questioned their wisdom. They questioned the sagacity. They questioned the likelihood of success. But you won't even read in English newspapers at the time of the War for Independence of someone saying they have no right to resist. They definitely had the right. It's just um, they exercise that right where we don't, but it's not difficult. People, say that all the time. Why don't we, resist the way our fathers did? Because we don't know liberty. There isn't a human being on this earth who has known freedom the way our fathers knew it. There just isn't. It's been gone for too long. And it's at the point now where we've gone a good 5 generations with the plutocrats in near monopoly control of education. And they are not going to give you the grand key for how to, they're not going to give you the weapons necessary to tear their playhouse down. And so
Right.
you have to find that in other places. But thankfully, we live in an era where if you are wise, you can access, and if you're wise, you will access the text of every important treatise ever written on the subject of self government, of liberty, of natural law. You can access them all on a 5-inch piece of glass 24 hours a day in English. And
Right.
we're left without excuse, except our cowardice.
Yeah. I think that the other that also goes back to it, and I want to go back further back philosophically,
Mhm.
but I also think that is a remnant of that is still in our, or can be still in our jury system if we're educated about how juries work, because if somebody is tried by a jury of their peers for resisting, um, you know a proper jury who is educated and understands liberty will recognize that a person resisting tyranny, no matter the cost, is a free and an innocent man.
That's right.
Um,
Yeah, jury nullification is another um, custom that we've lost. It's something that
and what
all
I'm
of
saying is that's a free that's a like a um, it's a protection.
Mhm.
It's a protection so that when we do resist, that we have the backing of our people that will be the ones that are judging us.
Absolutely, and that's how it was intended to be. And all of the, I wrote an article about this a few years ago. A lengthy article about the history of trial by jury, the Anglo-American history of that, and all of the Varsity Squad founding fathers, all of them came out in full-throated support of juries nullifying unconstitutional or immoral or unjust laws. So you've got some good people behind you when you advocate for jury nullification.
Right. Good. Well, let's take it back a little bit because um, I think we as Americans um, think of self government as we comprehend it, as a of course it's a given thing, Like we talk about self-government, even though maybe we don't understand it, but we pretend that we have it. Um, but where does this idea come from, and where are some of the, like, some of our ancients, how did they talk about this? Comparing, the idea of being, having somebody to protect you versus having the liberty and being self-governed.
Well, all of them recognized that man, I mean, all of those that are worth reading recognize the equality of man, the natural equality of man. And so if you and I are equal, then neither one of us has a natural right to rule over the other. And so then how would there ever be a such thing as a king? Well, king comes from the same root word as kin. And the idea was these communities were families and extended families. And you would ultimately choose a man, and it was typically the oldest in your community, who had proven himself virtuous and wise, who'd proven his ability to keep you out of war, because war was destructive. When you're an agricultural society, war destroys your society. And so when we were agricultural, you want to avoid war at all costs. And so the king did not, there was no, when Adam and Eve were created, Adam, you're given dominion over the earth. Well, okay, then he had kids. Well, obviously he has dominion over them, but what about when all his kids grow up?
Right.
Does Adam have dominion over Seth's children, or does Seth have dominion over them? And so the ancients would say that as being born equal, we create government for our own purpose. Now, that's originally. Obviously, as we all know, there are there are other ways to get power over someone, force and fraud, right? I can consent and I can say, do you know what, Mike? I'm gonna grant to you, I'm gonna loan to you a bit of my liberty that I enjoy by divine inheritance. I'm gonna give you a little bit of that and allow you to make laws for me in exchange for something that you give to me, that you offer to me in exchange. Well, that's fine, but also then when you get to a certain part and the virtue wanes, then you get people who say, "Yeah, but I'm stronger than you.
Right.
So you're going to do what I say," or they trick you. So you've got fraud, the trickery, and force, the might makes right, and you've got those two things which came along in the earth. So then you have to say, well, if you've got a situation where your community is now being ruled by someone who is, rather than protecting your life, liberty, and property, is destroying it, well, then you have you come to a crossroads. Do you take back your, whatever authority this guy has? Do you use force to offset his force? Or do you accept your new role as slaves? Right. But there is, I remember the words of Algernon Sidney when he says, "I'm rehearsing all this to you." He talks about how, you know, there were individuals and communities. The people came before the king. The people made the king, not the
Right.
king didn't make the people. And I remember that a phrase that he says in one of these chapters, and he's like, "This is such common sense." He said, "I wish I didn't have to explain this,
Right.
because there's no way you don't understand this, that
Well,
that all men are equal, and that often for our own benefit we give people power over us, but that doesn't extinguish that power in us. It simply says, I'm loaning this to you, but in any moment that I feel that you're abusing that power, then I can take that power back. Or even if I feel I don't like the way you're doing it. If you read Federalist 46, James Madison, he says, the states don't even have to say that a federal act is unconstitutional to nullify it. They can simply not like it.
Right.
It can simply be unpopular. Right. And so that's the way it is. If I give someone power over me and that person abuses that power or doesn't use it the way I want to use, because I am the owner of that power and I can take it back. It just, if you tell your son that he has the right to use the car, if he uses it in a way that you don't agree with, he may not like that you take the keys from him, but he's not going to argue that he has the right to keep the keys.
Right.
He
Right.
might argue that it's unfair and unjust and try to make excuses for why he did what he did. But ultimately, he knows that you get to take the keys back. It's your car. And so that's the thing that we've lost today, is the idea that just because you get elected, that does not give you immeasurable, unquantifiable, unretractable power.
Right.
It doesn't. You giving your son the right, and even if it came to you said to your son, you can use the car anytime you like. I'm going to be that guy. You can use the car anytime you like. If your son and you are walking toward the table where your keys are and you both reach for them at the same time, who's going to get to take the car? You are.
The owner, right?
The owner is going to take the car, right? So that's how we are. If we could understand that by giving someone authority, we do not give away our own authority to do that thing that we gave them authority to do. If it comes down to a question of, are you doing it to my liking or not? I love the Constitution, but no one who claims to understand the Constitution does understand it unless they understand the Declaration of Independence.
Right.
And the Declaration of Independence makes it very clear, right, that you don't have to give an excuse. If you're throwing off your government, Jefferson says, yeah, it makes sense to tell people why you're doing it. But even if people don't agree, you still can do it if it's for your own pleasure. Government in the very beginning only existed because the men who formed it reckoned that they were going to get more out of it than they were giving up.
Right. No, like, why would you do it otherwise?
Otherwise, it really does resemble the acts of a madman.
Yeah. Well, it is. And it's funny. I think the two devilish lies that came into existence, that we still deal with today are, number one, the divine right of kings, and number two, the divine right of elections. Like, somehow, just because you were born to a certain family, you have the right to rule. It makes zero sense. And somehow, just because a neighbor of mine voted you into office, you have the right to rule over me. Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, your neighbors can't weaponize their opinions against you, without you being able to answer force for force. But of course, that's why also the ancients, and I mean, not just the ancients, the relatively what we would call the moderns, but 16, 1700s, even prior to the Enlightenment, but the Enlightenment guys, they all made a very strong point of living with among those with whom you share principles of justice and good government and morality. Because if you don't, then you are creating a system that has inherent conflict. If you go into the system knowing that you and this guy that you're making a community with disagree on concepts of government and liberty and justice, then all you're saying is someday this is going to blow up.
Yep. And
and you don't want to do that.
there's no way that a community of what, almost 400 million people can, have the same values, have the
Mhm.
same ideas, and live coherently together. We're just not that virtuous.
Right, and you can read a letter that Abbe de Mobley wrote to John Adams, where he was praising America, saying, "Oh, you guys are so smart. You figured it out. You haven't given away your sovereignty to one central government. You haven't. You haven't. You recognize," he says, "that one law can't apply to so many millions of people. It is your great advantage," is what he calls it, that we didn't do that. But now we live under a central government that has consolidated all but the most meaningless power into its hands. And then it has doled out that power to unelected and unaccountable bureaucrats who rule with impunity, as these agencies rule as judge, jury, and executioner. And we but Mike, this is the thing you get to, and it's what I think I did a video on my Instagram the other night. There there is no tyranny without obedience to a tyrant.
Right.
So when people complain about the way things are, it's our fault. The government didn't lock down our country because of COVID. We stayed home because we could
Because we
there's
were
no
ordered to.
right. We could have resisted so easily, and we could have used that moment as a Stamp Act moment. The Stamp Act wasn't even in effect for a year before Parliament said, "Nope, back that train up. That's gone all kinds of wrong over there." Right? They We could have used that as our own stamp, but now it's like Samuel Adams says, now that the government is seen, they can close churches because of an invisible virus. They're going to do it again and again, and it's going to get worse every time. And we've become, as Machiavelli says in Discourses on Livy, he says, it is almost impossible to set at liberty a people who have been accustomed to the comforts of slavery.
Yeah.
Well, that's who we are. We're accustomed to the comforts of slavery, and it's nigh on impossible to free us. But you go back to Jefferson, and he's like, every generation is presented with the question, will we nourish the tree of liberty with the blood of tyrants? But that's every generation gets to decide that, Mike. Your generation, we're the same generation.
Yep.
We punted. We did not do it. Our fathers did not do it. Our grandfathers did not do it. But our children, that's yet to be decided. They've not come to that age where it will be handed to them and said, okay, here is your choice. Do you acquiesce? Do you consent to the tyranny? And if they don't do it, then another. But how many generations? I mean, talking about Marcus Aurelius, one part in his meditations, he's like, how do you ever ask when you're having these experiences where it's seeming one defeat after another? Do you ever ask how? He's like, I understand we have to endure, but how long?
Right.
And that's what I think often about the situation we find ourselves in. We're always willing to kick the can and say, the next generation will do it. And I do believe that, but then there comes a chance where the whistle's going to blow, man.
Yeah.
The final whistle's going to blow eventually.
Yeah.
And we got to get it done before then, because otherwise it's not as Trenchard and Gordon, but as the anti-federalist Cato said, You, by your cowardice and by your decision not to use courage and foresight, you are requiring that your children will wade through seas of blood in an attempt to restore that which you could have handed down to them had you not been a coward. That, that's Cato number 5 for those of you who want to read that. It is seriously, it'll
Wow.
freeze your blood when you read what this man says. And he says, we can stand up or we can sit down, we can kneel and crouch down. But just remember this, he says, that decision you're making that's easy on you will require your children to wade through seas of blood.
Yep. Yep. And I think, it's important. There's different kinds of resistance, right? There's the I am just not going to comply resistance. There's the I'm getting out of town resistance.
Yeah.
There's the putting the gun to the authorities' head resistance. I mean, there's everything kind of in between that. And I think they all have their place and time. And like for example, taking a AR-15 and running into the Capitol building probably isn't the smartest way to resist right now today, to try to take down the federal government, you and an AR-15.
Well, no, because you won't be successful.
Right.
That's ridiculous. That, when I hear people say that, I'm just like, either you're, counterintelligence, like you're the FBI trying to get me to agree to do something ridiculous,
Right.
or you're so ignorant, you won't last a day if something like that were to actually pop off.
Right.
Because you've got to be wise. You have got to do these things with wisdom and order, not just because we want to be successful. This is not a game, right? This isn't a game where you're going to get points for being courageous. This is something that we actually want to accomplish, and that it isn't a competition between two correct but competing ideas of what's right. It is tyrants and evil versus free men and virtue. That's it. So we're not competing. We're not out here arguing about, oh, well, it's nuance. No, nuance. No, it isn't.
Right. They are the enemy.
You are the enemy. As Cicero said, let us mark them in their brow, right? That they are traitors to the republic. And then let's get at it. But, this is a real thing that needs to be done with wisdom and order. Hence, everybody loves quoting the Second Amendment. They love quoting the end of it, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. But a well-regulated militia, why didn't they just say the militia? Because the militia, without being well-regulated, is useless as tits on a boar hog.
Right.
What are you going to do? You're going to run out there with your AR-15 and parent. What are you doing, Jethro? Get with your neighbors. Follow the advice Thomas Gordon gave. Thomas Gordon is quoting Livy, who says, "Get together with your neighbors, cousins, brothers, uncles, fathers, get together, train together." A well-regulated militia. So marching on your little AR-15, what are you doing? What are you even thinking about?
Right.
It has to be like John Adams said. He said 13 because there were 13 states, 13 clocks all striking the hour at the same time. Right. You talk about the Boston Tea Party. There were a lot. What about the Charleston Tea Party? What about the Savannah Tea Party? What about the New York City Tea Party? About the Philadelphia? Nobody talks about those, but probably because they don't want us to realize how organized this resistance was. This wasn't just a bunch of hotheads, right? there's a new biography of Samuel Adams. I would, I would really recommend it because I don't know the lady who wrote it or personally, but the book, I read it recently. It seems very even-handed. Plus, it describes it. This is not a guy who is just some, uh, rage monster who
Right.
had some sort of soldier fantasy.
Yeah, because
This
that's the
was a
impression a lot of people have of him.
Yeah, this was a religious guy, a family man, a guy given by his neighbors repeatedly elective responsibility, a guy who had a lot to lose, a guy who, but he had a gift. He had a gift for making people see things the way he saw them. And we're just fortunate that he saw them correctly, and
Amen.
we have to organize. I wanted to say something about this, Mike, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
Going back to Marcus Aurelius and meditations, which again, Thursday, starting this coming Thursday, 6 p.m. Central, hit one of us up and join. It's free. And we're going to read this book together. It's going to be amazing. But one thing he says is he's like, no form of toil. So this is, what book are we? Let me see. Hold on. Notebook 6. Notebook 6, paragraph 33. He says, no form of toil is unnatural for the hand or the foot as long as the foot is doing the work of a foot and the hand is doing the work of a hand. Now, obviously, we know that Paul makes a similar analogy in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. But my point in what we're talking about, this resistance, is don't be angry if you're the appendix and not the brain,
Right.
right? Know what you do, what you offer better than other people offer that. And each of us do that. Become well regulated in the sense that know thyself. And something Marcus Aurelius says, if that were so easy, philosophers wouldn't talk about it as much as they do.
Right.
You've got to know yourself. And when you know yourself and come to know, what do I offer the cause of liberty? What do I particularly, because if you offer X and you keep pounding, trying to do Y, not only are you making yourself frustrated and anxious and embarrassed, but you're also thwarting the cause. Because if you're a hand, do hand things, right? You know that saying, kings do king things.
Right.
Hands, if you're a hand, go do hand things. If you're a foot, do foot things. Don't try to do the other, even though you may think that another part is sexier or gets more attention. There wouldn't be a single reception by a wide receiver for a touchdown if there wasn't a really good offensive line, a good quarterback, right?
That's right.
That wouldn't happen. So yes, the quarterback and the wide receiver, they get all the glory, right? But those offensive line giving that quarterback the time to throw that ball downfield, they might not get the credit, but that wide receiver and quarterback know
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that offensive line deserves the credit. So in this effort to restore our liberty, do as Marcus Aurelius suggests. Find out if you're a hand or a foot, and then if you're a hand, do the work of a hand. If you're the foot, do the work of a foot, and then the whole body benefits.
Right. And by the way, that's pretty good. Just plain old life advice, not just how,
Right.
that's just good advice. But yeah, absolutely. When it comes to, I think a lot of endeavors get um, uh, stopped because there's too many chiefs and not enough Indians. There's too many too many agendas. I'll just say it that way. That's probably the best way to say it. Too many
Well,
agendas.
yeah, I've noticed that. Well, there's too many agendas and too many people who our self-proclaimed patriots are charlatans. I'm not saying that they don't really want liberty to be restored, but what they want, they don't want it as much if they're not getting paid to do it. If I'm not getting rich and famous off my patriotism, I don't want it. So that's not patriotism, because if you read the lives, for example, of the signers of the Declaration, those guys, almost all of them, died really terrible ways for their courage. And today, what I see, and I'm not going to name names because I don't look on their heart, but I see in the fruits that some of these people who are these self-professed leaders of the conservative or patriot movement, that more than anything, they're just promoting themselves.
Right.
And you don't find that in our fathers doing that. I wanted to read to you this from book 6 as well, regarding this effort to bring people along and to convince the government, get back in your constitutional cage.
Right.
So Marcus Aurelius, he's like, you do what you can do, right, with regard to this. But then he says, try to persuade them by all means. But when it comes to action, you should go ahead, even if they demur, whenever the principle of justice directs you to do so. Guys, if you were to read the books that our founding fathers read, you would be so afire with a zeal for liberty, the way they were, that we wouldn't have to question whether or not we will restore our liberty, because you would look around and see the faces of people who understand what we'd lost, what it's going to take to get it back, and they were ready to pay that price.
Yeah.
But we don't have that understanding because we've purposefully been fed, this is Dick, this is Jane. See Jane throw ball to Dick. See Spot. Where our ancestors were reading Tacitus
There's a
in
difference.
Latin.
Yeah.
And we're all proud if our 9-year-old today, is not blowing spit bubbles anymore.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? But you got
Yeah.
9-year-old James Madison reading, Sallust and Tacitus in Latin and taking notes. That's why, guys. They're not smarter than us. Don't get it twisted. Our founding
No.
fathers, they're not smarter than us. No way. Not at all.
Maybe a few distractions.
Probably fewer distractions, but we can do what they did, but we just have to know what they knew. And we don't know what they knew because we go to schools run by the tyrants who are never going to teach you the things that oppose tyranny.
Right. It's against their best interest.
It doesn't make any sense, right?
What was it Trenchard that said that, why would the thief or the evil person do anything against his interest? And of course, these government schools are not going to do anything other than perpetuate the government, perpetuate the tyranny that they have over us.
Precisely. And it's one of those, it's the reason that, I say we're blessed to have access to all these books that the founding fathers read. And it isn't an exercise of like, how they put out, these are the 100 greatest books of all time. And I have a little chart and I'm going to read them all. Great. Knock yourself out. But it's not that kind of deal. It's like whenever I teach a class on these books, and sometimes you'll have parents say, well, what's my kid's homework? When are we going to have a test? I'm like, you had a test today. oh, well, my child didn't tell me that you assigned a test or you had a test. I'm like, he had a test if he listened and applied those things. Ultimately, the test is going to be, does there come a generation whose parents cared enough to educate them on the principles that once restored our liberty? That's all it's going to be. That's the test. And so it isn't just a matter of, I've read these books. The devil also believes and trembles. Who cares that you do? It doesn't even matter. What matters is, do you read them and do you marinate in them and do you act on the principles that you find therein?
And I think it's also important to have an imagination to,
Mhm.
and that's a, and I, I think we have lost our imaginations. But if you can imagine what a truly free people would look like, if you can imagine what you would do in a free society, not having to look over your shoulder every single time you're driving in a car, or every time that want to start a new career, you have to get a license or a permission from some bureaucrat to start it or to start a business. There are so many things that are just so entrenched in our lives that it's right now that's even hard to imagine what a truly free society would look like. But I think it's important to try.
Yeah, it is, I think, impossible. I think, and that's one of the things that keeps us divided, is because we allow talking heads and politicians. It is part of their policy to divide us so that they can command us, right? They don't want us to realize that we have, that all of these groups into which they divide us, that we all have one thing in common, and that's we're being oppressed by the same group of people.
Right.
But and that's one of the things they want to do. They, oh yeah, of course, these guys want freedom, but they want freedom at the expense of fill in the blank of another group. When
Yeah.
in reality, liberty as inherited by all mankind is is the tide that lifts all boats, Mike. Everybody is better off
Yeah.
in a truly free society. And guess what, bud? If you're not, there are 200 and something other countries to go live in. I mean, seriously, if you choose, and even in this, there's supposed to be 50.
That's what I was going to say. It's
There's
there,
50. There's supposed to be 50 countries to live in this union.
and in how many thousands of different communities could have different
Right.
philosophies and different
Precisely.
ideas and running different organizations. There's
Right.
it's endless, the beautiful ways that we can create in a free society where free people are free to come and go. Um, the, the amazing ways that we could construct to build up humanity it's infinite.
Infinite. Exactly. And we can have these little communities, and it doesn't mean we have to get along.
Right.
All it means is, I'm not going to attack you. You don't attack me. You don't steal from me. You don't harm from me. I don't steal from you. I don't harm. I don't have to agree with you. You can have laws in your community that I think are just the most immoral, unconscionable principles, but I'm not going to attack you over it, because you'll say the same thing about mine and you don't attack me. And we all get along perfectly well, because there's no more fighting over, there's no more uh, fighting over abortion. There's no more fighting over welfare. There's no more fighting over um, gender or whatever.
Yeah.
There's no more fighting over any of that stuff, man. There's no more
Fighting
fighting
over fighting
over.
over borders and
Yeah, there's no more doing that. All that's gone. But all it takes, you see, is education, because that's Madison. That knowledge is the only sure guardian of liberty.
yeah. And here's the other thing that you don't have, of which would scare a certain person, which is you have no more need for an overseer. You have no need for somebody to tell you what to do. And when that happens, that person loses power. And therefore, that's why just by forming a community and doing something like that is resisting to a great degree.
It is. I mean, today, I honestly think the greatest and most effective act of resistance is to improve your personal virtue and then to commit to keeping your kids out of the public or charter or even private school system and to teach them timeless principles of liberty, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And what our fathers did worked. The things they learned. Why do you think people are like always getting like, oh, that's such a good quote. Oh, I love that quote. It's not just because it's old, it's because it's so dang true.
Yeah.
And our fathers didn't read these in quote books, man. They read these in books that their fathers, and mothers knew would raise them in the way they need to be raised. And so the greatest act of resistance today is have a bunch of kids, raise them to be true patriots, and then get out of their way. That's the greatest act of resistance.
Man, that's a fact. That's good stuff.
Well, just like the Aurelius thing, just remember, you want to exhaust peaceful means, right? It's like Sidney says in Discourses too. You want to exhaust peaceful means, as Aurelius says, by all means, persuade them, try to persuade them. But in the end, when it comes to action, regardless of how they want to paint your actions, regardless of how they want to sell it to other people, when it comes to actions, you must do as justice compels you to do, regardless of anyone else's acceptance or rejection of those acts. When justice demands you do something, then you must do it, or you must acquiesce to a life filled with injustice.
You are listening to And If Love Remains.
First of 23 installments requested by Dr. Levitt. Trying to be in compliance here because we're taking him and that whole organization down.